Because if in God's presence we find abundant joy and eternal pleasures, outside of God's presence we find nothing but misery and despair and grief. Everything that is the antithesis of joy, that's what we find outside of God's presence, okay? That is the truth about hell. Now, for most of you in the room, like you probably knew most of that, right? You're like, okay, cool, I get it. Jesus talked about it a lot. That's great. If you're like me, it probably doesn't still like sit well with you, right? Like, how could God actually do that? If he's really so loving, if he really loves all the little children of the world, red and yellow, black and white, if they're all precious in his sight, why would he want this to happen to anybody? For a long time, I hated this idea, and I didn't even want to talk about it with people. It was one of the reasons why I got completely turned off to Christianity when I was in high school. I had in my mind like this deep cavern, right, and everybody's yelling out like, we're sorry, we'll go back, we'll change, and God just, they're like, no. That's the idea of hell that I had. Not because of something that I had read in God's word, but rather because of what had been told to me and things that I'd seen in culture. That's the wrong story. And I know it's the wrong story because in this story, the people are the ones pursuing God, and God is the one who's unwilling to be found. But the story of Scripture is that God is pursuing us, and we're the ones unwilling to be found. So is that really the truth about hell? Are people cast there unwillingly? Do they consciously sit there and say, sorry, 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 and then God says, no, 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 sorry for you? Is that it? I'd say no. I'd say no because, not just because of the truth about hell, but because of the logic of hell. Here's the logic of hell. In the same way that hell is God's absence in the presence of his wrath, hell is also God's absence in the presence of our autonomy. Now that's a big word. It's an SAT word, right? I hope that you know it, but let me explain it if you don't. Autonomy just means independence. It means me wanting to be on my own. Another way you can read that is hell is the absence of God in the presence of my ability to be away from God or to choose to be away from God. And let me show you this from Luke 16. Starting in verse 19, it says this is a parable that Jesus tells, a story to communicate a point. He says, there was a rich man who would dress in purple. Just so you know, purple was like the hardest color to get back in the day. Like it was a pair of like off-whites, if there ever was one, right? Off-purples. And fine linen and feasting lavishly every day. But a poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores, he had leprosy, was left at his gate or the front area of his property. Lazarus longed to be filled with what fell from the rich man's table, but instead the dogs would come and lick his sores. And one day the poor man died and was carried away by the angels to Abraham's side. It's another way of talking about heaven. And the rich man also died and was buried, and being in torment in Hades. Hades is another way of talking about hell. It's a Greek word for it. He looked up and he saw Abraham a long way off with Lazarus at his side. Father Abraham, he called out, have mercy on me and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, because I'm in agony in this flame. Son, Abraham said, remember that during your life you received your good things, just as Lazarus received bad things. But now he is comforted here while you are in agony. Besides all this, a great chasm has been fixed between us and you, so that those who pass over from here to you cannot, and neither can those who cross over from there to us. Father, he said, going to get Abraham again, I beg you to send him to my father's house, because I have 5 brothers to warn them, and so that they also won't come to this place of torment. And Abraham said, they have Moses, they have the prophets, they should listen to them. He says, no, Father Abraham, he said, if someone from the dead goes to them, they will repent. But he told them, if they didn't listen to Moses and the prophets, they will not be persuaded if someone rises from the dead. Subtle foretaste to Easter. Let me explain a couple things from the story. This is a parable. It's a story that is meant to communicate a point. It's not meant to be nitpicked, and it's not meant to be broken down for every small little detail, okay? So we're not going to do that. All we're going to do is observe a few things about this that I want you to see that I think is going to show us the logic behind hell. First, notice this. The man in this story does not have a name. He's just called Rich Man. Why is he called that? Well, he's called Rich Man because riches, wealth, the things that he owned, were what he found his identity in on earth. Notice he's referred to as a rich man before he dies, and he's referred to as a rich man after he dies. Why is that the case? I believe that the reason why, and this is not my opinion, this is the opinion of a lot of people who study this scripture as well, that the reason why is because that this man's identity in this world extended with him into the next. He has no name, he's just rich man. Also notice that he has no relationship with God. You might be like, wait a minute, what do you mean by that? When this man is in hell, who does he cry out to for mercy? He doesn't cry out to God. He cries out to Abraham. Why does he cry out to Abraham? Because he's a Jewish man. And for the Jews, Abraham was what they would call a patriarch, or one of their fathers. He was one of like the bigwigs, the head honchos, the dudes who started their way of life. And what we begin to see as Jesus' day comes is that we see Jewish people idolizing and elevating these men almost to the same level as God, which is to say that these people in this time period began to have a greater relationship with their religion than with their God. And you might be like, okay, that's dumb. Why would you do that? Well, don't hate on them, because a lot of y'all do the exact same thing. A lot of y'all find your identity not in Jesus, but in what you can do for Jesus. Your grandpa's a deacon. Oh, I sing on the stage on a Wednesday night. Chris asked me to do call to worship on a Wednesday night. That's not your identity. If your identity is in what you can do, what are you going to do when you can't do it anymore? This man has no relationship with God. He only has a relationship with his religion. The last thing that's really important to see is that this man has no desire to actually leave hell. Notice what he says when he reaches out to Abraham. He says, Abraham, tell Lazarus to dip his finger in some water and bring it down to me so that I can be refreshed. Do you see this? The dude doesn't want heaven. He wants what heaven can give him. The guy doesn't want to be with God in heaven. He just wants the blessings from heaven from God. And to take it a step further, he still wants Lazarus to do the work for him. He's learned nothing. He actually has no desire to leave to be with God. Why? Because he's completely satisfied being away from God. The only thing he's upset about is his circumstances, not the state of his being. And this is very, very important because it shows us the logic behind hell. Hell, like we said earlier, is not a place where we are unwillingly sent. It is not a destination where we are unwillingly sent. It is a reality that we willingly choose. We see that in this man. We see that in this man, he is just continuing in the next life what started in this life. This life was defined by being not with God. So guess what? His eternity would also be defined with not being with God. Hell is simply the continuation of the life that we live here on earth. It's a continuation of a life that we live where we don't need God. And you might be like, wait a minute, like, there is nobody who would actually choose hell. Like, no one's choosing hell on earth, Chris. I would argue differently. Because if hell is the absence of God, every decision we make void of God is a decision to choose hell over heaven. I think we choose hell with every hateful work and condescending remark we say to somebody and about somebody. We choose hell with every rumor that we spread about somebody else to put them down and to raise us up. I think we choose hell when that happens. That's what I want y'all to see here, is that we are choosing, listen, don't hear me wrong, we are choosing to be away from God right here and right now. So what happens when we die? God gives us what we wanted all along. I love how C.S. Lewis put it. He says that at the end of everything, there will really be two kinds of people in the end. Those who say to God, thy will be done, and those to whom God says in the end, thy will be done. All that are in hell choose it. Without that self-choice, there would be no hell. Think about this. Sin is like a broken compass, okay? If you're trying to get from point A to point Z, you're going to follow it. You're going north. It says north. You might actually be going south. And initially, right, you're going to think that you're going north. You're going to expect for the air to get a little bit colder and the weather to change a little bit, right? But as you continue walking, you're going to begin to see, I'm not going north. I'm actually going south. But here's the thing. You don't notice that initially. The first couple steps you take with a broken compass don't really tell you anything. You're just walking in the wrong direction. And listen, like so many of us can identify with that. How many of you have sat back after a decision you made or something that happened in your life and you go, how did that happen? It didn't just happen in one decision. Because sin is not a decision that you make, it's a direction that you walk. A mentor of mine, he told me this one time. He was just talking about like boundaries that he put up in his life. One of the boundaries that I have in my life is that I will never be alone with another woman, right? He's like, so I will never like ride in a car alone with another woman. I'm not going to meet one-on-one with another woman. If I meet with like a woman at like my office, the door's going to be open. There's going to be a window there so people can see it. He's like, I'm not going to be one-on-one with another woman because I can never cheat on my wife if I'm not alone with another woman. That was his logic, and I think it's really good logic. Something that I hold to in my life as well. Here's the point that he was making. He said, Chris, when I meet up with that woman to have an affair, that's not where my bad decisions started. They started a long time before. They started in that second glance that I began to give and the little flirty remarks that I started to give and the text message that we began to exchange and so on and so forth. Here's what his point with that one particular issue. It was this. Bad decisions are a byproduct of other bad decisions. They don't happen in isolation. And that's what we see here. The logic behind hell is that hell is the continuation of what we have already chosen for this life. It is a reality that we willingly choose, not a destination to where we are unwillingly sent. It's not like a prison that's locked from the outside when everyone's trying to get the door and say, I want out, I want out. It's a prison that's locked from the inside. The people who are there don't want to leave because to leave would be to give their allegiance and their submittance to Jesus, which people don't want to do. That's the logic. So we have the truth, absence of God in the presence of his wrath, the logic, absence of God in the presence of our autonomy. So do we just need to be done here and go home and be sad? No, because I think that there's also hope. What attribute of God requires for hell to be a reality? Is it his justice? Is it his holiness? Is it his glory? While all of those play a part in the reality of hell, I would argue that they are not the primary attribute which results in hell. Listen, hell exists because of God's love. And it's in God's love that we actually can find hope for hell. Like you might assume, hell is not an affront. Hell is not an attack against God's love. It's not like we have God's love and we have hell, and it's like we can't have one without the other. No. Like they exist like exclusively and mutual. Like they exist together. Let me explain why. God's incredible love for you and for me causes him to be angry at your sin. God is so angry at the decisions that we make that are against him. But it's not an anger like we would probably assume. It's similar to an anger that you would have towards cancer killing a loved one. He's angry because he knows what our sin is doing to us internally. He knows what sin is doing to our world around us. The hurt and the pain that is in your life is a byproduct of sin. And he hates that. And it hurts him and it makes him angry. And he's also angry because in our sin, we have committed the greatest grievance that you could ever do, and that is to look at the one who created you and said, with the breath that you've given me to live for you, I'm going to live for myself. It makes him angry because he knows we are not living into the people that he created us to be. And you might be like, Chris, like I'm not, like I hear you at church, you guys always talk about sin and how bad people are, but like listen, like I am not that bad of a person. Like I might lie occasionally and say it's like, but I'm not that bad. Like listen to me, listen. For you to say that you're not that bad is the same as your dad going to a hotel to cheat on your mom saying, but I tipped the bellboy. Yeah, I was going there to like ruin my relationship with your mom, but like I tipped the bellboy and I gave him $100 and like he was happy about that. Like what? No, yeah, that was cool, Dad, that you did that, but you went there to cheat on Mom. That's what we do. We live an entire life against God, and occasionally we glance up and say, all right, I'll do this for you. All right, I'll do that for you. Isaiah, one of the guys in the Bible, he says this. He says, all of your good deeds are like filthy rags before God, because in the reality of it all, the good doesn't outweigh the bad. Because God loves you, it requires for God to give you a choice. Like the only way for a loving relationship to exist is for you to have a choice to love and for God to have a choice to love you. Love is not love without freedom to choose an alternative. In this freedom, we have chosen to not love God, but to instead love things and love people and love ourselves. And that decision is an attack on God and his work of redemption on the earth. So God has to get rid of and cast out everything that is against what he is doing in this world. That includes Satan and his demons, and listen, that includes you. For hell to not be real, for it to not exist, God would have to not care about evil. He hates evil. He hates the things that most of us hate. He just hates them a lot more than we do. God hates sex trafficking. He thinks it's terrible, but guess what? He hates it more than you do because he cares about the problem of lust in your heart that's causing sex trafficking. God hates murder, but he hates it so much he cares about the anger that's in your heart that results in you acting violently towards somebody else. That's God's position towards evil. So if God's going to be serious about hating evil and loving what he has created, he has to destroy what is evil. How does God destroy evil without destroying us? That's where the good news of the gospel comes in. That's why there actually is hope for hell. Why did Jesus talk so much about hell? Like, why was it always on his mouth? Why was he always bringing it up? He brought it up because he wanted you to know what was going to happen to him. If you take nothing else away from tonight, take this right here. Jesus endured your hell so that you could experience and receive his life. Don't miss that. How on earth could God destroy evil, but yet not destroy you? Because he endured your hell. Friday is Good Friday. We will celebrate the death of Jesus specifically. On Sunday, we will celebrate his resurrection. If you live in America, you probably know that Jesus died on a cross. You've seen an image of it somewhere. You've seen it on top of a church. You've heard a preacher talk about it, right? But what does that mean? What does it mean to say that Jesus died by crucifixion? Well, crucifixion was a form of execution invented by the Romans. If you don't know about the Romans, I'll just give you a short snippet. They were really good at killing people, and they knew how to make people suffer. And they had this way of killing people that they called crucifixion, in which they would take an individual and they would hang them with their hands up high and their feet down low from a pole. Tie their hands from here, and they would tie their feet, and ultimately people would suffocate to death, right? Because if you hold your hands up high, you do it for a while, it's harder to breathe, right? That was crucifixion. But here's what you need to know about Jesus' crucifixion, and more specifically even what led up to it. Jesus is interrogated by a Roman ruler named Pontius Pilate. You probably heard his name. And he tries to negotiate with the people of Israel to say, listen, it's a festival time. You know I have a tradition during your festival. I release one prisoner. He can go out. And so what about this Jesus guy? Could y'all want me to release Jesus? And the people are like, no, we don't want Jesus. We want Barabbas. Now, Barabbas, he's a murderer. Like, he's a dude who's like started insurrections and killed people. And so Pilate's like, okay, well, listen, let's punish Jesus a little bit first and we'll bring him back. And so they take him, and it says that he was flogged. Now, flogged, it sounds like a religious word, right, or an old word. But let me explain to you what this was, okay? They took Jesus to an open courtyard, stripped all of his clothes off his body. They had a large round stone that they put him on face first. They tied his hands and his legs this way, and his hands this way and his legs this way to where he was completely exposed. And then they took a whip, they called it a cat of nine tails, which was a whip with 9 pieces of leather. At the end of the leather was pieces of metal and stone and bone and sharp objects. And the whole purpose of this was to whip somebody with it. And when someone would be whipped, the appendages on the end would stick into someone's skin, and they would therefore rip their skin out. And the death sentence for this was 40 lashes. Well, they gave Jesus 39 just to say that they didn't condemn him to death this way. So they start with his feet, the bottom of his feet, and they work their way up, his legs, his back, and his neck 20 times. And then they flip him over, and they go 19 the other way. Pilate brings him back before everybody and says, okay, he's been through a beating. Is he good to go now? To which the religious people in the crowd incite them to say, no. Crucify him. Crucify him. And so, making Jesus carry his own cross with feet that have had the skin ripped off of them, he walks miles outside the city to a mountain above the valley of Hinnom. And once there, they don't tie his hands to a cross. They nail his hands and his feet to a cross. And he hangs there for 6 hours before dying. Now, The worst part about all of that was not even the physical pain. It was the spiritual abandonment that Jesus experienced from his Father. But I want you just to hone in on the physical pain for a second. Jesus endured your hell, separation from God. But guess what? In enduring separation from the Father, listen, don't miss this, don't miss this. Jesus experienced the byproduct of hate and despisement and anger and jealousy and violence. The fullest experience of that poured out on him. Scientists, not Christians, scientists tell us that there is not a more excruciating way to die than by crucifixion. It is the most painful way of death invented by humanity, and that's how the Lord of this universe died. Why? Because that was the only way that he could get rid of evil without getting rid of you. This weekend when you get all dressed up, you put that like nice suit on and that cute little dress, like remember what you're celebrating. You're celebrating the slaughter of Jesus. And you know something? The book of Hebrews tells us that Jesus endured all of this because of the joy that was set before him. You want something? Jude verse 24 says that the joy of Jesus is, guess what? Listen, is you. Which is to say that Jesus endured hell so that you, not just Christians, so that you personally, intimately could receive his life. He endured our hell so that we could receive his life. So let me do this. Let me end tonight with good news and bad news, okay? Good news, bad news. The good news. Last week we talked about how God is working to bring heaven to earth, all right? So what does that mean? It means this. The good news is that no matter who you are, whether you're a Christian in the room, or you're an atheist, or you're questioning, or you have another religion, here's the good news. You are going to get to experience a piece of heaven here on earth. You will. No matter who you are, you'll experience it. You're going to experience the goodness of relationships where people love you. You're going to experience the joy of helping people that are around you. You're going to experience an encouraging word from time and again from somebody that cares about you or knows you. Like, guess what? No matter who you are, you're going to get to experience a little piece of heaven here on earth. Why? Because we talked about last week. Because heaven is being brought to earth by God's people. And God's people exist. So you're going to experience a little bit of heaven here on earth, no matter who you are. That's the good news. Okay, here's the bad news. No matter who you are, whether you follow Jesus or you don't, whether you're a Christian or you're not, you can expect to, and you probably already have experienced a taste of hell on earth. You've experienced the hurt that comes from other people's selfishness. You've experienced the emptiness that comes when you make decisions to put things into your body that don't ultimately fill you up. You've experienced the guilt that you've had from decisions that you've made with another person or with a group of people. You've experienced the pain of loss of a loved one. You've experienced the shame that comes when people spread rumors about you. Like you have experienced, whether you're a Christian or not, you've experienced hell on earth. Listen, this is the reality we live in. We all experience a little taste of heaven, and we all experience a little taste of hell here on earth. But I want you to understand this. Listen, don't miss this. If you follow Jesus, this earth is the closest thing to hell you will ever get to. You will experience bad things on this earth, no matter what you believe. People will die. Life will not always go well. You will not always live life on top. That's going to happen for all of you in here. But Christian, follower of Jesus, can I encourage you today? This earth is the closest thing to hell you're ever going to experience. But on the flip side, listen, lock in, don't mishear me here. If you're not a Christian, if you don't follow Jesus, then this earth is the closest thing to heaven that you will ever get. If you follow Jesus, this place, this earth, is the closest thing to hell you'll ever experience. Listen, if you don't follow Jesus, then guess what? In the same way, this earth is the closest thing to heaven you will ever get to and you will ever experience. Why? Because God's presence is moving and active here on this earth. God has revealed himself to you. He's told you what he's like. He's told you what he wants for your life. And listen, when we live into that, when we live with God, we live in heaven on earth. It's a taste, but we live in it. But listen, don't mishear me. Look right here, guys. Please don't mishear me. My heart is never to be the guy that gets up here and scares you. Like, I hope that, even in this series, we've been saying that, like, the point of the gospel is not to scare you into a decision, because if I can scare you into it, someone can scare you out or talk you out of it. So I'm not saying that, but listen, here's reality. Listen. Yesterday, I did a funeral for a man, perfectly healthy, went on a cruise with his wife, and died while on the cruise. Today, one of my good friends got word that a good friend of theirs' mom committed suicide. Guys, nothing reminds you of the lack of power you actually have more than death. And death is a reality for every single one of us. And listen, my plea to you is not come to Jesus so you can go to heaven one day and avoid hell. My plea to you is this: come to Jesus now so that you can stop experiencing hell here on earth. Because no matter how much we might deceive ourselves, no matter how much we might distract ourselves, if we don't have Jesus, we know there's something missing. Because this world was not meant to work on our